What kind of an airplane? Somebody else has not got a pitch. What do you got? Baby Great Lakes. Stand up.
It fits.
It fits? How much grease does it take? Somebody else. A what? I can't. RV8. He must be from somewhere in the east or something because I couldn't understand him. Yes, sir. Cap 10. All right. A story about Cap 10s have nothing to do with what we're doing here. The first two Cap 10s that came into the country were given to me to do pilot reports on. And one of the more identifiable pictures is of me standing on the backside of one of those two airplanes. And I'm not kidding you a bit. I'll show you the picture if you want to. The side number on that airplane was F-BUDD. Honest to God. Honest to God. And the editors of the magazine put it on the opening page, and under it says we couldn't have said it better ourselves. That's one of my favorite. There's not a lot of pictures of me, but I like that one. Okay, so we got a wide variation of airplanes going from a Cap 10 to a. How many game birds we got in here? I'm sitting in here with normal folk. The question of right there we have said right there, and I threw game bird in the middle of it, going from the Cap 10 to the Baby Lakes to some who's got decathlons or Satabris in here. Bunches of it. All right. When we're done, you guys with Satabris, let's get in the corner and I will discuss with you all the things you can break on that airplane and not get killed. Because my first 1,000 hours of aerobatic training was in. I'm gonna turn my phone off. Hang a second. Oh, this is a guy I get calls from all the time. His first name is Spam. Turn this thing off. Hang on here. They track you down everywhere, don't they? Come on. Come on. Die on me. I can't shut it off. Do me a favor. Sit on this or something. Just the variety available in aerobatic airplanes in the last. Bear in mind that the Citabria came into existence about 1966, 67. Prior to that, there were no readily available aerobatic airplanes. You had to get like an F2 Waco or a T6, or you were making do with airplanes that could do aerobatics, but they weren't aerobatic airplanes. And when the Citabria came out, all of a sudden now you had one you could actually buy, and schools popped up all over the place. And that's where I cut my teeth in aerobatics, was instructing in Citabrias in a school. This is 1968, and it just exploded from there. I mean, really exploded. I'm going to ask a question here just to kind of break up some age and knowledge differences. How many do not know the name Leo Loudenslager? One. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. All of you, I'll give you an assignment every so often to Google things. Google Leo Loudenslager. Because Leo was in the same hangar with me, as a good friend, excellent friend, flew his airplane a bunch. And we were instructing in Citabrias, and there he was, building what became the Laser 200. And he was national champion 9 years running. And he is the one that dethroned the Pitts as being the aerobatic king. And he is the first one to start flying serious aerobatics in a serious monoplane. Now, how many of you are looking to compete? What level of competition you want to go to? Sportsman. Intermediate.
Sportsman.
Sportsman. Good. Those are all intelligent. Say again. Because if you're all looking at sportsmen, that means the rest of you are just looking to have fun in aerobatics. Am I correct? You just want to do aerobatics. All right. I can see some head nodding, but put your hands in the air. Everybody who is really just looking to be able to do aerobatics safely. And that is what I think the standard deviation on the people that want to compete versus the people that just want to have a good time doing airplanes, flying airplanes. And I'm here to tell you, you do not need to buy an extra or a game bird if you just want to do weekend aerobatics, unless you just got more money than you know what to do with, because there are so many good airplanes out there. Now, the limitations in some of the airplanes, let's start at Clip Cub, all right? A Clip Cub, how many don't know what a Clip Cub is? One. Come on. What I really want you to do throughout this whole whatever it is we're doing here, forum, is if anything crosses your mind, if you got any kind of a question, any kind of a comment, any kind of a smart ass comment you want to lay out, put your hand in the air, please. I want you to become part of this conversation.
So on the clip cup, flipped wing, but it's the same original.
What a Clip Cub is, you take 40.5 inches out of the root, not out of the tip, out of the root. So your strut attach points move in, and at that attach point at the top, there's a little stiffener that's put in, and this is an STC, by the way, because now your strut's coming in at an odd angle, it's kind of bent, so there's a little vertical that goes up there to take the vertical load, and they will do everything that a Citabria will do on 85 or 90 horsepower. The number of them that are out there for sale is fairly small, and I don't know why. Because if you take one of the most fun airplanes I've flown is a Clip Cub with a C90 in it, not an 0200, a C90. And the reason for that is a C90 gets all of its power at a much lower RPM. The torque curve is different than an 0200, so you get more usable horsepower. And the name of the game is weight. You want it light. You can build let's say you're going to build a Cub, not buy a Cub, build it, because Cubs are too damn expensive to buy anymore. I remember when they were $500, $600, $700 airplanes with all the fabric hanging down. But you can build one. Rag and tube airplanes are fairly easy to build, and they are reasonably inexpensive to build. And you can take something like a Wag Aero kit and make it when they have a Clip Cub, and that'll do everything you can possibly think about doing. They're so much fun, and they do it at slow speed. Yes, sir.
So on that, you get the C90 on it. What are you talking about? It's all stroked out. Is there a step between the C90 and the 290? Because the question I have relates to our altitude.
Where are you? Where are you? What's your altitude? Okay, so you're always working around 6,000 or 7,000 feet, and that's assuming no temperature. Of course, you don't get a lot of temperature. No, just to pass that along, on my phone, I've got a photo of my shop thermometer. I welded for almost 40 hours over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and the thermometer was always at 112 to 115. I live in Phoenix, so I'll talk. You want to talk about density altitude? We'll talk about density altitude. Okay, here's the cure. If you're working at high altitude, your cure is not always horsepower, because horsepower comes from bigger engines. Bigger engines weigh more. You can put an 0320 on an airplane that you can put a C90 on. Yes, you're going to have a lot better performance, but climb, but it is still going to suffer because it's heavier. Weight is everything. How many people in here weigh 170 pounds? Probably some. Okay, you guys are showing off, but you're doing. The FAA standard passenger size is 170 pounds. All airplanes are designed around 170-pound passenger load. And that's, to use an aeronautical term, that's BS, because almost none of us weigh 170 anymore. I weighed 170 when I was about 9, I think. then flashed right through that. But the name of the game in all these airplanes is weight. When people talk about building like pits or skybolts or anything, and they will kind of slough off, oh, okay, it's 50 pounds heavier than it should be, et cetera, et cetera. How many of you have carried a bag of Portland cement? 50 pounds. Do you want to carry that every damn time you take off? There's no reason to. The name of the game is weight, weight, weight. Do any of you remember the name Hale Wallace? Nobody? That's too bad. Hale Wallace was the who he bought the Skybolt rights and everything from Lamar Steen, and he produced them. And he built the lightest Skybolt ever made. Routed spars, titanium fittings. I mean, he went way overboard. 300 horsepower. I flew it. Tremendous airplane. He could have short stopped that whole thing because he was a good solid 75 pounds overweight. He himself. Get rid of your butt and your airplane flies better. All right. You can make we should make that into a bumper sticker or something. Get rid of your butt and your airplane flies better. An airplane like that is a $40,000 airplane on the outside. You can probably do better than that. Your baby legs, it'll do aerobatics. It's not real comfortable aerobatics simply because you're stuffed in it, and and that airplane on the open market probably what, $18,000 airplane maybe today. Okay, how many of you don't know what a baby legs is? Probably a lot of you. Go ahead and put your hand up if you don't know what it is. Baby legs is probably the smallest commonly available biplane, and you can get 14 or 15 of them into this room. I'm serious. I mean, they're a tiny airplane, but you're scrunched in them. And if you've got an inverted system, you go negative. In any biplane, when you go negative, what's going to happen is the downwash coming off the wing, if you don't have a canopy, is working on the top of your head. Matter of fact, my first pitch was the number 6 airplane, number 6 pitch that was built right from the factory, and we didn't have canopies for 3 years. So I flew with a leather helmet and ski goggles and a leather thong going from the middle of the goggles to the top of my helmet, because when you were negative, it was trying to push your goggles down over your eyes. So there's something to be said for a canopy if you're going to be working outside. Now, how many of you actually, you guys are talking about just sport pilots, how many want to be able to fly sustained inverted flight? I want to see your hands. That's about half of the number of people that said sport aerobatics. A Citabria without a inverted system, which is most of them, you're stuck with positive G maneuvers. And normally the maneuvers that you can do inside is what most people are happy doing. However, having a inverted system, which greatly complicates your airplane, raises the price and some of the maintenance work, at least lets you do true slow rolls. So you can go negative when it. But that doesn't mean you absolutely need them. You can aileron roll your brains out and have no problem at all. It will not fire. Now, T-28s. When we first started the flight school, which was 1968, these were aerobatic airplanes. They were licensed aerobatic airplanes. That's another way of saying they can't be broken. Wrong. We were the first school. We had 8 Citabrias, a BT-15, not a BT-13, a 15, and a Bravo model T-34 in a school in New Jersey. And we thought we were well, first of all, I was in my late 20s. We all thought we were invincible, and we would routinely go up to 5,000 or 6,000 feet and roll inverted. They had a header tank, about 2 gallons, and just glide around with the engine stopped, on the assumption it would always start when you're right side up. You couldn't pay me to do that today, because I've had engines quit, but I didn't want them to. But a Citabria level airplane, of which there are lots, are what most people need because, among other things, it's pretty hard to sell the significant other that an S1S pitch is a family airplane. Okay, a Citabria or any of that variation up through the decathlons are pretty useful airplanes. You want to go somewhere, you can actually go somewhere in it. If you want to do it, get a KCAB or a decathlon, and you can do part of the trip upside down. But I was part of all of this as it was developing. I remember so clearly when we took delivery of our pits the first time, first good inverted airplane we'd ever had. We were flying VOR approaches upside down just because we could. So things have changed now. Inverted flight is pretty common. In the home build area, the obvious airplane is the pits. They'll run from 18 to as high as 50,000, but 30,000 gets you a real good S1C. And you do not. Now everybody's going to say, yeah, but a C is a flat wing. That's why we call them flat wings, because they're flat wings. They don't have the symmetrical airfoil with the S1S, which is what the S stands for. There are not. In the first place, when you're talking S1Ss, this is just me pulling a number out of the air, but I think it's going to be pretty correct. There are not 150 pilots in the entire world that are better than an S1S, than a lightweight S1S, because you work it to its limits and it'll do just almost everything. So an S1C is that far. You remember Armstrong took a flat wing, an S1C, to the world contest because he broke his other airplane, and he airbrushed ailerons on the top wing. I don't think that helped him much, but nonetheless, that's a lot of airplane. If I was going to pick out a single home built as being the quintessential aerobatic fun airplane, doesn't cost much, doesn't cost anything to feed, it's hard to break, except when you land it. It would be an S1C, 160 horse, not 150, 160. 150 is okay, but there's a big difference between those two engines because of where the torque curve is. So 160 horse S1C, which will go from 18 to 30,000. And if you pay 30, it better be a good one. Way more aerobatic airplane than almost anybody actually needs. Want to get an S? All things being equal, meaning the same horsepower, the same weight, an S1C will outclimb an S1S for the same reason that a Citabria, a normal flat wing Citabria, will outclimb a decathlon with the same horsepower because of the symmetrical wings. Same thing can't be said when you're upside down. Yes, sir. Nope. Well, what he's saying is that a straight Citabria without an inverter system is more than most people need, because you can do almost everything you're going to do, especially in sportsmen. You haven't got a whole lot of negative dotted lines in it. Now, as you move up from sportsman, in the last, here's another home built coming in. Turn and take a look at him. He would have been here earlier, but they had him parked on the ramp down here for 3 days. So they couldn't find a gate for him. That's Delta for those of you who can't see it. Let's wait till can you hear me okay back there with that noise? Okay, good, thank you. So Citabria, for almost everybody that here is going to work for you. Now, incidentally, with Citabrias, they're kind of separated into wood wing, wood spar airplane, and aluminum spar airplane. Now, just so that you all know, for what it's worth, I'm an aero engineer, primarily structures. So when I start talking structures, I'm talking, plus I'm a long-time welder and builder, and et cetera, et cetera. Wood does not fatigue. Aluminum does. And aluminum, if you've got a piece of aluminum that's that thick, and you keep bending it, eventually it's going to crack. The SN curve of the material is such that aluminum will always eventually crack. It may be 3 or 4 lifetimes down the road, but it will crack. Steel, you can design, go, if you're keeping your loads under 45,000 PSI, it'll go for infinity. That's why you almost never, ever see fatigue cracks in steel tube fuselage. Another thing good for the Cetabrius. But what I'm going to give you here is a short course in inspecting Cetabrius spars. We had a 7 GCB as a damned ultralights. The we had a leaseback airplane that was being flown by a rudder, and he ground looped it and barely kissed the wing. I mean, barely, just scuffed the fiberglass. So, and the insurance company says, "Well, we'll replace the wing." So the guy that owned the airplane says, "Screw it, let's replace both of them." So we had one of the wings with all the cover off of it. At least that sounds right, right? That one sounds right. We were carrying it across the hangar, and I was at one end, he was at the other end, and I was looking down the spar face, and we twisted the wing just a little bit. I said, "Wait a minute," because they do have cracks. They do get cracks in the wooden spars. And what I'm going to tell you here is it's real easy not to see them because these spars look perfect. But when he twisted a little bit, you could see cracks on both sides of the plywood doubler, 2 cracks on each side. Because when he twisted it, the varnish wasn't lined up anymore, and you would see the crack pop out. So if you're going to look at if you're buying a wood spar Citabria, 2 of you do it. And what you want to do is one guy's going to be at the wingtip, and you're going to have a flashlight, and you're going to be looking through one inspection report and putting the flashlight through the other one, and he's going to be twisting the wings while you're looking at the spar faces. Because where they crack is the plywood doubler where the spar comes in. They crack right outboard of those, and they do crack. So that's how you inspect them. I personally would rather have a wood spar airplane, personally, because I know it's not going to fatigue. I'm not going to worry about cracks. I'm not going to worry about fatiguing. Yes, sir. Well, there aren't. I'm trying to think of an aerobatic airplane that's got a webbed spar cap wing, and I can't think of one. Most of them are laminated blanks. I mean, and a pitch, which I know the best. They're not even an inch thick, but they got wires. And that makes all the difference in the world. Yes, sir. The question, the, the question if is there any question on what that was? Uh huh. Powered parachute? Yeah, it's the big problem. Right. Okay. The question was, if you buy a airplane that somebody has rebuilt or built and it's overweight, is there any easy way to get weight out? Not really. The depending on the airplane, if you're willing to, get rid of the electrical system. Your battery's a heavy chunk, your wiring's a heavy chunk, the starter's a heavy chunk, the generator's a heavy chunk. But that then puts the onus on you and trying to figure out how to get that thing started when you're at another airport. There's a good friend of mine that talks about the difference between Wrights and Pratt and Whitney's. He says the only thing right about a Wright is its name, and it's spelled wrong. No prejudice there. But to give you some idea how much weight you can knock out of an airplane, The S2A I've got now, which by the way went past 8,500 hours last month on that airframe, of which I put 76 on 7,600. I put it through a complete total rebuild in 2006, and the game was to knock out weight. An S2A, when it comes out of the factory, is normally 1,035 pounds. Mine is 975 because we went real light on the paint. Matter of fact, when they painted it, I says, when I take a nylon stocking and run it down the leading edge, I want to hear the weave singing. I do not want the weave filled. My airplane, which is a red airplane with black and gold trim, there are 3 quarts of color on the entire airplane. And it pays off. Huge amount. It's real easy to add weight by adding stuff that it's like gaining weight, as a human being. We tend to gain it in big blobs, but then it comes off in a little bit. We gain it in pounds and we lose it in ounces, and that's the same way it is with an airplane. But to go with one that's already done, it's a lot harder. Look at it and make sure you can see everything that is needed, and if it's not needed, take it out of the airplane. That's like altitude. When I'm working with my students, I tell them, forget about feet. When you're downwind and you're 50 feet low, a lot of people say, no big deal. 50 feet is a 5-story building. By being 5 feet low, you just put a 5-story building on the end of the runway, and vice versa, the other way around. So think about weight the same way. Don't think of it in 10s and 20s. Think about it in 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s. Get it to add up that way. Any other questions on that subject? Yes, sir.
Decathlon that's been converted over to have the metal spar.
All right. On metal spars, I have never been involved in a metal spar failure, so I don't know where they fail. I imagine like I said, I'm a structural engineer. The primary loads are right outboard of where the spar goes in, but that's not guaranteed. So I don't know. And the problem there is you're talking about fatigue cracks, which don't jump out at you. You've really got to be looking for them. If I owned a metal spar Citavi or a Decathlon, I wouldn't be worried about it, but I'd spend more time looking at it than I do on the rest of them. Yeah, I would be, but bear in mind, how many people in here know what the SN curve is on materials? All right, 4 of you. So that means you guys know how aluminum and steel differ in wood. So most people don't. So most people don't know to look at aluminum structures. There's a reason why there's so many ADs on Cessnas made after 1977, 100 series, and the PA-28 Cherokees. It's all fatigue. It's all things broken. Any other questions? Okay. Now, let's say you want to move up the aerobatic ladder. If you plan on going all the way to the top, you want to go to unlimited, the name of the game is you're going to have to spend a lot of money and a lot of time. It's not just the purchase price of the airplane. It's you have got to, that's a blood and guts sport at that level. This is not something to go out and practice on Saturday morning and think you're going to catch up. And when you're doing this, now I've got, in my hangar, I've got 4 pits, an RV9 and a Mooney that looks like a B-52 compared to everything else. And I own the S2A and then I lease an S2C. On takeoff, I am looking at about 14 and a half gallons on takeoff. In cruise in the S2C, we're looking at 13 and a half cruise. We're looking at 24 in aerobatics takeoff. Is anybody okay, bear in mind, I'm on Scottsdale Airport. Somebody tell me what you're paying for fuel. What are you paying for fuel? $4.60. Somebody else. $5.35. And do we hear a 6? $6.50. Do we have a 7? Okay. I topped out at $9.20. $9.20. I sent a note to I own or lease the hangar, and I've got all those airplanes in it. I sent them all a note. It says, hey, They dropped our fuel by $1 a gallon. It's now only $8.20. $8.20. Life in the big city ain't cheap. So you got to factor that in. If you're going to compete, you got to fly a lot. This is not, unless you're just, sort of, I don't know what you would call it, a spectator competitor. You're in it for the fun. Now you guys are talking about competing. Are you thinking about trying to move up, or are you just doing it for the fun of it? Okay, if you're planning on going up
For the fun of it.
for the fun of it. Okay, so you two have two different futures in airplanes. Whatever the airplane is that you buy for sport right at the beginning, you can be satisfied with that airplane for most of the rest of your life if you want to be. You got no choice unless you buy a extra or a Zevco or a Game Bird right up front. You're gonna be stopped at the top as you go into advance. You're gonna run out of airplane, and you're just gonna have to do better. You're gonna have to buy more airplane, and they're not cheap. They are not cheap. Also, for what it's worth, every airbag, yes sir. A Christen Eagle is a Pitts S2A. When I went out to Frank's place to fly the prototype, up on the wall, and by the way, has anybody besides me been to Frank Christian's personal place? Have you ever been to an operating room? Is that clean or that well organized?
Nobody believed he made airplanes because it was too clean.
You can't imagine the way he organized things. And how many have seen the if you're talking about an Eagle, how many have seen the assembly manual that comes for the Eagle? It looks like it's put out by NASA. Actually, it's not as good. NASA doesn't do it that good. It's amazing stuff. And when I went out there to fly the prototype, he had a big shelf on one wall, and on that shelf was an S2A airframe. He had bought an airframe from Curtis because Frank's a pretty good sized guy, and he was a serious competitor. And he started modifying that. He had filled in the handhold on the back of the wing. He had triangulated the front base, so it was a single place airplane. But somewhere in the process of doing that, he says, I figured if I want to do all this, I can start from scratch. So that's where the Eagle came from. In terms of aerobatics, the two airplanes are almost identical. The Eagle or the Pitts, when you got G on it and you're pulling the line or whatever, it seems to sit into the line a little bit more steady than an Eagle does. But you got to fly both airplanes a fair amount to see the difference. We're talking, minuscule differences. An Eagle lands a little bit easier because the spring gear gives a little bit. So if you're a little bit crooked, it doesn't snatch. It'll twist a little bit and it'll come around. But you probably think you get better visibility out of an Eagle, and you don't. You know why? Because Lycomings are 39.5 inches wide. I don't care what you hang them on. So you're still looking around that. But the sheet metal on an Eagle stops at the longerons, and the sheet metal on the Pitts comes up around your shoulders. So you're aware of it down here, and they kind of, you feel in a gopher hole. Otherwise, the airplanes are almost identical. The Eagle is faster. Go into advanced. It depends on the pilot, doesn't it? Bear in mind that for years, Morrissey, dominated advanced with an S2A, same airplane, 200 horsepower. But that was a few years back. And that was Morrissey, not us. So it boils down to what you're going to be real hard to get up into advance in it.
Difficult to figure.
Oh God, yes. I mean, there's a different deal today. Today, sportsman is intermediate. Today, intermediate is what advanced was a few years back. They just keep getting it harder and harder and harder. You see a whole lot more dotted lines, and I see a reasonable amount of gray hair in here. And dotted lines are to be avoided the older you get because it hurts. But the Eagle is a terrific airplane. But if you're going to get serious about going into advanced, I don't know, that's going to be pushing it. No, I can't imagine. I can't imagine. Or an S2A. You'll see a lot of S2Bs and S2Cs. Yeah, the B and the B and the C, the C will nibble at the top edge. I mean, it's pretty damn close, but it is still not going to compete with the monoplanes. Not to mention the fact, I don't know if it still exists, but for years there was kind of a bias, a judging bias internationally against biplanes. And part of that, it might be a bias, and it might also be because most biplanes are harder to judge because they don't have the lines. You can't see what you're looking at. That's why if you can tell if you go to buy a pitch, and the paint job is a big wide line going down the side and a big wide line going straight across the wings, you know that airplane's seen some competition. And by the way, that's another thing to bring up. If you're buying airplanes for that, and if you're looking at pitch specials, for instance, the S1C and the S1S, flat wing versus round wing, one will go outside better than the other one. The S1Cs will always be in better condition, and the engines will always last longer because they're not being competed in. A fixed prop on something like an S1S or any aerobatic airplane is continually seeing 3,200 RPM, 3,300 RPM, they're constantly being oversped. So a mid-time engine on a pitch like that, 500 hours, 600 is mid-time going into high time, and just figure it's going to be a 1,000-hour engine because they just get overrun so hard. Anybody else? Yes. That's Sonic's what? Okay. All right. Your question is, does the Sonics have enough aerobatic capability to do something? I cannot address that model of Sonics directly because I haven't flown it, but we've all seen the film of Tex Johnson rolling the prototype 707. You can do aerobatics in any airplane if you know what you're doing, but you got to know what you're doing because the airplane is not designed for you to screw up, put G on it. And I think that's probably where the Sonics is. If you really know what you're doing, I wouldn't be afraid to roll it. I would hesitate looping it simply because I don't know what it's going to do on the down line. But there are better places to put your time and money. A flat wing pitch, if I was going to say a difference between a Sonex, dollar wise, and all right, you just backed me into a corner. Good move. So sell it and buy a Citabri. Yeah, absolutely. Now, incidentally, this is a young lady back here. And back in the days when I've got around 1,100 hours of aerobatic training in Citabri, so we always used to joke that you can always tell a Citabri instructor at a distance because his right arm is much more developed than his left arm because they are hard. To it, I'll tell you what, I hadn't flown a Citabri for a lot of years. I went to fly one with someone who was going to demonstrate rolls, and I was in the back seat, which is where I normally am. And I went to roll the airplane, and without even thinking about it, my left hand went down and grabbed the bottom of the seat, and I leaned forward without even thinking. It's just instinct when you're gonna roll one of those things, or use two hands, because, and that's another place where gray hair, becomes a problem. Well, decathlon is better, but it's not what it should be. And the decathlon extremes, the ailerons are still too heavy for what it should be.
What?
They're still too heavy. The ailerons are still too heavy. Yeah. Now, bear in mind, it's a pitch pilot talking, so I don't have a lot of muscle in here. If it gets to where I have to actually grip it, it's too heavy. Okay. Any other points? Questions? Whatever. There's a lot of airplanes available that you can fly through intermediate. Decathlon extreme, that might. I don't actually know anybody doing it, but the way if you're thinking about doing that, by the way, get a hold of Greg Kuntz. He's got a great little flight school in Alabama. He's got his own runway. You're staying at his B&B. He does the cooking. He's a terrific cook. If you know Greg, you know he looks like he's a good cook. And Greg and I have flown for 40 or 50 years together because he's one of the guys that came out of St. Augustine from Aerosport down there, and that was a whole little cadre of crazy people. I've got I've got a fair amount of time water skiing on the inland waterway. And we stopped doing that when somebody wrote a letter to the editor, said, I'm seeing airplanes land on the waterway with no pontoons. And then they said, that's impossible, can't be. So we decided to back off for a little bit. I've got photography of two Stearman in formation water skiing. So we did a lot of crazy stuff there. And by the way, if you haven't seen it and you're into aerobatics, go on to YouTube and Google Carl Pascarell. Pascarell with no E on the end. This is important that you all do this because it is real instructive. And what it is, it's about 3 or 4 minutes of Carl doing aerobatics in a cassette with a camera right here. And he's doing them just right off the edge of St. Augustine Airport at about 10 feet. And it looks like it's being flown by a machine. You got to check him out. Check that video. It's really inspiring. Carl, C-A-L-C-A-R-L, Pascarell, just the way you'd expect it to be, 2 L's, but no E on the end. You'll find it very entertaining. Very entertaining. And then he is also in the Red Hawks with the 3 Marquettis. He was the one flying the inverted portion when they were doing the canopy to canopy rolls. And so
Show up at our contest last weekend.
good. He hasn't got a lot working for him in a lot of ways, but when it gets slow, he hasn't got the power to pull out of it unless he's got a different prop. But remember Pete Myers out here. Yeah, there's enough gray hair in here to remember Pete Myers. A lot of you guys don't. He originally did a air show routine in a double clip wings, clip fuselage. Then he went to a cassette, and for years did shows out here. So yeah, and you seldom see a cassette going for more than about 20,000 on the outside. And if you're going to build one, they're the easiest airplane out there to build, just about. And 180, 190 miles an hour speed. Anybody else? If you are considering getting a pitch, for instance, I was going to write on a screen. I can't do this. All right. My name is Bud Davisson. My website is airbum.com. And I took my blog out of the website and I put it on Substack. So if you want to get involved in that, it is buddavidson.substack.com. And what that is, it's a free blog. It shows up as an email every weekend except this weekend. And it's airplanes, it's life in general, it's a lot of stuff. All right, so, and I'm easy to get a hold of. And here, my email is Bud, and you can go ahead and email me if you got questions or anything. I will not give you my phone number. Wish I could get rid of my phone number. My email is budairbum@cox.net. If you got any questions on anything, shoot them at me. Yes, sir. Email Bud with 2 D's, airbum, AIRBUM, @cox.net. He didn't even write it down. You know, he was memorizing it. I can't do that. And one other thing I do a little bit of, like I said, I got 7,600 hours in a pitch, and almost all of that's in the pattern, teaching people to land them. So if you want to try out a pitch or a pitch type airplane, come on down. That's what I do. 2 hours Scottsdale, Arizona. Yeah, you might want to wait a month or two. to come down. Well, actually, the heat isn't that much of a problem because we get out there really early. I'm always on the ground before it hits 100. However, and by the way, why yes, we're having a heat wave down there. It's not unusual heat wave. It's unusual because of the length of it, but the media loves it, and the media made a big deal out of it. They say, "Oh my God, it's the hottest it's been since 1990." 1990 is not last week, you know. And I was flying. I was actually flying. This is before I started working really early, when they had to shut down Sky Harbor Airport because it was off all their charts.
You think on the super decount on the which part of it gets you a little bit?
I doubt if there's 5 pilots in the world that can tell the difference.
I think I can.
Well, that all of us think we can. He says he thinks he can, and I said all of us think we can. That's why we're pilots. But no, I don't think you'll notice it enough. There's not enough deflection difference to even measure. Oh, it might be, but because it's more rigid, it's also more likely to crack. You know, there's that aspect to it too. You know, are you talking about a Super D or just a regular D, Super D? Okay, yeah, they're still to me they're still a two-handed airplane. But then, like I said, I'm spoiled. Yes, sir. Say again. One design. All right, I've flown 3 different one designs. Starting with the prototype and working up through. They are a very mission-specific airplane. They're made to. And by the way, they never did do what they were designed for. You know, they were I don't know if you all remember, but the one design was originally designed so that everybody be flying the same airplane, and everybody have 150 horsepower. Well, I've never seen a 150 horsepower one design. You know, they started out at 180 and went up from there. But if you're building one, put this in the back of your head. A wood airplane of any kind, in this case it's wood wings, takes a lot more time to build because the parts count is astronomical. Many more parts in a wooden structure than there are in a aluminum or wagon tube or whatever structure. Well, and every rib's a different shape, and because the ribs don't intersect the spar in a straight line, the corner blocks are all different. I mean, everything is. I mean, there's a million parts in a wooden airplane. Not to mention the fact, if you decide to build one, drop me a note, and I'll give you a quick primer on skinning plywood wings. Because we built the flying replicas of the Waddell Williams racers, covered them. The most painful thing I think I've ever done in an airplane is taking a jigsaw to an airplane that's already through silver. Because the plywood you get from the factory is it's not dried all the way through, and the sheets don't match. And so we came up with a technique where we can absolutely be guaranteed of all the plywood being used being 2% or 1% below the maximum ambient wood content, so that in the airplanes that they're now done, they've been flying for years. When it gets real low humidity, you can see the ribs because they tighten up, but they never wrinkle. And that's a real problem you've got, because you have one sheet will wrinkle and the next one won't, and the humidity comes up. Okay, I'm about done. Here we go. I'm sorry, stay again. One design will go through intermediate. Yeah, probably. It's not my kind of airplane. I don't like airplanes that are that neutral. And if you notice the canopy, if you look at a bunch of them, the older ones have a lower, more streamlined canopy, and the later ones have a higher canopy, and I've flown them all. And the reason for that is because with the original canopy, the leading edge of the wing was right where you wanted it to look and flare. You know, it's really hard to see where you're going. Has very little breakout force. Ailerons are very quick. It does what it was designed for. You know, doing more or less advanced aerobatics. So, yes, sir.
Qualified for the unlimited.
He says we had somebody qualify for the advance for the team, unlimited team in it. So they will get, I mean, aerodynamically, they've got what you would expect with that kind of an airplane. I don't think that, to my taste, they don't feel as good as an Extra or a Zevco or anything like that. But and because they're tiny to begin with. I compare them to an Extra. You know, they got to be 3 feet smaller. You know, but they'll do it. But it's still, as I said before, it comes down to the pilots. Yeah, comes down to the pilot.
Game bird.
I have not flown a Game Bird, to be honest about it. They had one in town. They wanted me to come fly it, and I was tied up doing something else. But they're all better airplanes than I am as a pilot, and both of them are extremely well built airplanes. I mean, the quality and the build, you'll never find any airplane. Oh yeah, yeah. But and I've flown most of the Extras. But and as I keep kidding people, I will be dead for 3 days before I make a bad landing in an Extra. With that easy to land. So, all right, I'm all done unless somebody's got a question.
You have any time in a PJ 260?
Funny you should mention the PJ 260. How many people in here even know what a PJ 260 is? All right, Nick DePuzzo was a good friend, real good friend. Ed Mahler got killed at my air show, and I was the resident witness to the FAA on that accident because I was sitting right there when it happened, and I was part of the whole thing. And there's a lesson to be learned there. His PJ was a 290. He'd put a bigger Lycoming up front, and to balance it off, he had put struts on the tail to put lead in them. And he was flying, and this, by the way, is probably the most documented airshow accident in the country because all three of the networks were there filming on press day for the air show I was putting on. This is out on the tip of Long Island. And he was doing his routine, and the recall was me going out in the runway in my van and circling, telling him to come back. When he did a snap on the top, and I saw something fall out of the loop. Went out there, and there was a strut about that long, and I couldn't tell what it was. It looked like an airplane inner strut or something. So I circled. He came back and landed. What it was one of the struts on the leading edge of the tail, where he put the lead. And the welder let go and dropped it. So he went into the hangar, had a conversation with the feds, and he says, well, I put those struts on there myself. The airplane never had them originally when it had the original 260. And so he elected to go ahead and fly because he'd had a lot of hours in it without them. And he was high doing some maneuvers, just make sure the airplane was okay, came around, lined up on the runway, building speed to do an 8-point. And just as he entered the box, you saw the tail go like that and then just disappeared. Horizontal, just flat, tore off the airplane, took the rudder with it. Now, listen to what I'm going to say now, because there's a couple of interesting facts here. He was at maybe 800 feet, not 1,000, probably 800. And the airplane instantly tucked hard. And it tucked so hard, but he rolled it around right side up. And he was high enough for it to tuck again. So you can imagine what kind of G. And it did not fold the wings. So that says something about the structure. Came around again, he got it rolled out right, hit the ground at about a 45-degree nose down. Now this is all being filmed. We were on a field, Suffolk Airport, what used to be the Suffolk Air Force Base, and it had a guard unit on it. And so we were using their fire crew. The airplane tucked the second time like this. You saw the crash truck already pull into frame. As soon as something started to happen, they popped the clutch. And they were on the ground. They got the fire out, but he died because of impact. But the reason that the tail failed when the FAA got into it was there was a lot of corrosion and very poor maintenance in the back part of the airplane where all the tail stuff attached. So you can't overlook anything when you're flying these kind of airplanes. You've got to make sure it's absolutely as good as it can possible. I spent pretty close to the price of the airplane in my airplane in maintenance over the 30 years I've owned this one, because it's not the prettiest pitch, but I guarantee it's one of the best maintained ones, because I'm in it 2 hours a day, bouncing off the runway with somebody determined to kill me, and my job is to make sure they don't. But the PJ, to those who don't know what it is, it's a redesigned Great Lakes basically. The Nick DePuzzo went through it and made it into much more of an aerobatic airplane than a Great Lakes ever thought about being. And 290 probably helped. I never flew a 290. I won't have flown the 260. And it's a nice flying airplane, you know, but it's a big airplane compared to everything else. It's huge. And here's a Nick DePuzzo story. He was an aeronautical engineer, structures, north side of Philly. And Leo cracked the spar on his airplane. And that's a wood spar. And right over your knees, it looks like a railroad tie going across the fuselage. And he was looking for a fix on that. And you've never seen anybody who is as weight conscious as Leo Levenslager was. Never. I mean, his airplanes were as light as they could possibly be. When we were talking to Nick on the spar, he got to talking with Nick about ways of lightening up his airplane. Now, how many engineers are in the room? Probably a couple of them, right? All right. Well, we all know in a column load, we need a lot of material in the middle. We don't need much at the ends. So he was trying to convince Nick that he could acid etch his tubing in the airplane so it's thinner at the ends than it is in the middle. And he knocked 12 pounds off of his engine by grinding off all the excess casting and all the rods and all that kind of stuff. Amazing stuff. And if you ever knew Leo, he was very slim and very purposeful in everything he did. And he literally had no ass. I accused him of having a buttectomy to save a few pounds. No, all right, I'm all done unless we got a question. Yes, sir. I'm flying at pitch. You don't worry about that kind of stuff. You know, when the crap hits the fan, the best thing you can do is go, oh God, and wait a little bit, and it'll be right side up when you come out. You know, it's the landing's the hard part, where the metal, and that's actually not the hard part either. You know, the pitch reputation is about 98% BS. Now the 2% that's not BS, if you get into that 2%, it's over before you know you got into it. But there's no reason to be in it. Huh? I'm using a 2A, but I've also got a C, an S2C that I use. But to be honest about it, I only use the S2C for people I'm putting into S2Cs. Because of that prop, their approach characteristics are so much different. I can't teach people to fly. I can teach people to fly any pitch in an S2A. I can't in an S2C because of that prop. The minute the power comes off, the prop turns into a piece of plywood about that big. When you're doing a downline snap out of a hammerhead on a S2C, for instance, you'll pivot it. It'll be real nice. You're coming downhill, but you don't want a lot of speed. You don't want the speed to come up. So you chop the power. When you do, you slide into the belts because the airplane slows down and you don't. And when you're on downwind and you're going to try to make a power off landing from downwind, you don't do that casually because it's going to look more like a gunnery run when you're making it. And that is the way I teach part of it. But anybody else? All right. Oh, another one. Skybolt is a big S2A pitch. Aerodynamically, it is a pitch. He infringed on Curtis's patent on the. By the way, do y'all understand the difference between the way pitch wings are set up as a normal biplane? Anybody got a question on that about the aerodynamics? I know there's more than one. We got one or two. Okay, here's the deal. Every biplane you've ever seen, Traveler, Stearman, whatever, they're set up the same. The top wing has a higher angle of incidence than the bottom wing does. Okay, now the difference in those in that angle is called decollage. You might want to write that down. You can work it into your next cocktail party. Just throw it out casually. Yeah, I've got a lot of decollage. And the reason for that is so that when you stall the airplane, the top wing, which is the front wing usually, stalls first, so the bottom wing still has some lift and is picking the tail up to help put the nose down. That's a grand idea unless you're upside down. Then it doesn't work. So Curtis came up with the idea of having the wings parallel, no decollage, but and symmetrical, so they lift the same way. But the top wing is a different section than the bottom one. So it always stalls first, regardless of what direction you are. And the beautiful thing about a Pitts, any of the models, is it doesn't care what direction it's pointed. It just flat doesn't care. Yes, sir.
Is that same airfoil difference apply?
Yes, the Eagle, the Skybolt, and the Raven out of Canada are, and by the way, Curtis patented that concept, are the only biplanes that have that same setup. That's why I say an Eagle is just a real pretty, well, maybe pretty, Pitts. Yeah, yeah. That's it. Starduster too. Now, Stardusters are a much older generation airplane than any of the rest of them we've been discussing. And he never designed them initially to do aerobatics. That's why if you pay a lot of attention to the, by the way, anybody here, how many are talking about biplanes here in general? Okay. Do you all belong to the biplane forum? Yeah. If you don't, do. The biplane, most forums are populated by people that think they're experts and they're tossing out opinions and ditching people and stuff like that. That's not what this is. This is entirely populated by people who want to learn and by people who know. There's quite a number of people on there that have been in this longer than I have. And I took delivery of my first Pitts 51 years ago. So you got a lot of knowledge. And if you have any interest in any biplane, go on their biplane forum. And then if you're talking about a Starduster, there's a lot of guys on there that are building and repairing and flying Stardusters. You can ask your question, you get really good information and experience out of people that have done it. But it was not designed initially for aerobatics. Then he beefed up the tail, and it's not a Pitts, it's not a Skybolt. Not even close. Skybolt is dollar for dollar. Skybolt probably the best airplane you can buy because you very seldom see them real expensive. All right, and now I'm gone because I got another one of these things to give. Talk to y'all later.